So do we think that was the point that Trump got upset and kind of changed the tone for the whole meeting?
Well, certainly JD Vance has started, a little bit with tense. Do you think it's respectful to come into the Oval Office and act this way? But certainly Trump took Zelensky's comment of "you will feel it soon" or "you will feel it in the future," I think is exactly what he said, as some sort of veiled threat, and he reacted to it. And he
Right.
did not react well, and Zelensky did not recover well. And so I think that is the flashpoint. There's a word that Zelensky says in there that is undetermined, right? It's undetermined. We've looked at it through closed captioning, 3 different closed captionings, and it comes up with "in touch" or, just
Nice ocean.
nice ocean. Yeah.
Well, which makes sense.
Yeah.
We have the ocean between us, so
Yeah,
makes it
but that's
easier.
not the word he said. So I'm not sure what the word he said or what the word Trump heard, but he certainly said "you will feel it in the future," and Trump took that as a threat and reacted, I think, accordingly to a world leader who is sitting in our Oval Office. I mean, you cannot let a world leader come in. And then during the exchange, instead of just letting Trump have his word, he just kept arguing, kept arguing, kept arguing. And this is not a debate table. This is a photo op and a little press gaggle. Like this was supposed to be non-controversial. So I know we're going to discuss kind of what people are saying on Twitter and Facebook from both sides. But I think you have some history of why Zelensky was in the White House at the first place.
I do. So he came to sign the Ukraine mineral deal. So for us that don't know the behind the scenes of that, the U.S. mineral deal the U.S. wants access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals like lithium, titanium, to reduce the dependence that we have on China. These minerals are used in tech, defense, and energy industries. So think of your smartphones, your electric cars, and your fighter jets. The deal would bring money and investment into Ukraine's economy, and it is also seen as a way to strengthen the U.S. Ukraine amid the Russian aggression. So why does the U.S. care so much about Ukraine's minerals?
I think we have to care about minerals wherever they are in the free world. And, I think we have to treat countries with the sovereign status which they have. And that's kind of why you're trying to make a deal for it. Certainly we have invested billions of dollars into supporting Ukraine in this war. And, not that it's a quid pro quo, because that's not what America does. But Zelensky, and maybe I'm getting ahead of you, but Zelensky said something like, this will put generations of Ukrainians in debt. And what we have to realize is that generations of Americans are in debt because of the foreign policy and the money we spend around the world with nothing in return. And while, that we've never been transactional in the past, like, oh, we're not going to help you protect yourself, and we get X in return. And the truth of the matter is we can't afford not to be transactional at this point. And we have to figure out a way how we can be transactional and still be a world leader, during these times. And, and I don't think anybody, I grew up under Reagan, and certainly Russia was the boogeyman. We were in a Cold War with Russia, but we also had Russia as an ally during 2 world wars. And so, the history is, and I'm not saying that we choose Russia over Ukraine, but I think, history would show that we probably are better off choosing Russia over China or North Korea. And we've not had them on our side during those wars. And so history would show us that, should the whole world blow up, that Russia is more likely to be an ally than an enemy, or at least the 20th century proved that.
Okay. How dependent is the U.S. on China for these minerals right now?
I would say we're fairly dependent, although the recent actions have moved some of this more towards Taiwan. And of course, Apple has recently announced they're going to start a $500 million investment with 20,000 employees. And that part of that investment is creating and all these chips and microprocessors for phones here.
Okay. Would this deal actually help Ukraine's economy, or is it more just about benefiting the U.S.?
Devil's in the details. is my guess, but it sounds like it is a benefit to both countries. I don't think that this particular deal had anything to say that Russia either received Ukrainian territory or had to retreat. It was a deal between Ukraine and United States. And so I think it was a first step towards kind of, like you said earlier, that it was a first step towards strengthening the bond between, from a diplomatic standpoint, and showing the rest of the world that we're diplomatically attached to Ukraine in, through this action.
Okay. So one of the things that came up today was basically that Zelensky was hesitant to sign. He wasn't, it seemed like he had some, just something was holding him back. And so the deal required Ukraine to hand over 50% of its profits from these minerals to a fund benefiting the U.S. Zelensky argued that this would put Ukraine in debt for generations and compared it to selling out the country's future. The deal didn't include any security guarantees, meaning Ukraine could give up resources without getting more protection from Russia. And it was framed as a repayment for U.S. aid, but Zelensky argued that the U.S. gave aid as a grant, not a loan. Now, one of the things that he said was that, a ceasefire had been signed before under different administrations. So it seems like that's where his hesitancy was coming from. But what did the U.S. want in return for this deal, and was it fair to Ukraine?
I guess fairness is always going to be in the eye of the beholder. Whether it's certainly, if the United States has a financial vested interest in Ukraine, you would think that we're going to be more protective of Ukraine. So I don't really understand how he sees it as a negative deal on that front. From the financial front, he may have a point. I don't know the numbers to suggest that he has a point or not, but I could see where, hey, 50% is too much or whatever he's saying. And so, after today's argument in the Oval Office, it appears that if certainly this is not the deal that will be signed.
Okay. Why didn't the deal include security guarantees? And wouldn't that just make sense to say, yeah, sign this and we'll get Russia to back down?
Well, we don't want to backdoor a war where we are either subvertly or overtly in a war with Russia. And I think that is probably the sticking point with quote security guarantees. And we don't want to be seen as escalating the war by saying security guarantees, would be my guess.
Okay. Was U.S. aid to Ukraine really alone, or was Zelensky right on pushing back?
He may have been right on pushing back. The truth of the matter is that there's a new administration. Zelensky's coming to ask for more aid, and he wants more support from the United States. And now he has to work with the Trump administration versus the Biden administration, and of course the Obama administration when this thing really first started.
Okay. So during the Oval Office blow up, so Zelensky met with Trump to discuss the deal, but the meeting turned into a heated argument, which we all probably saw at this point. Trump and Vice President JD accused Zelensky of being ungrateful for U.S. support. Trump warned Zelensky he was gambling with World War III by not agreeing. The deal was left in limbo, and Trump said Zelensky should come back when he is ready for peace. And the planned press conference was, of course, canceled after the fallout. So, yes, we saw the heated debate. We saw that, some people were saying that maybe there was a miscommunication based on, the different languages. Why would JD say that Zelensky was being ungrateful? Is it just because he didn't come in and say, thank you for everything that you've done so far, but then started kind of trying to make his point a little bit stronger?
Yeah, we're not going to show the whole 15 or 16 minutes of it because we don't want to violate copyright and all those sorts of things. But Zelensky, the first real flashpoint occurred when JD Vance kind of called Zelensky out, and Zelensky's like, I want to ask a question. And then he pushes back on JD Vance saying, when have you been to Ukraine? Right? And then JD Vance says something like, well, now you've done these photo ops. Like I don't need to come for a photo op. And so all of that. So Zelensky kind of misunderstood the moment and misunderstood the optics of the Oval Office.
Well, again, is that a language barrier? Is that type of
that's
barrier?
bad preparation by his foreign relations team, like, or it's Zelensky going rogue on his own, right? So you'd probably have to ask, somebody in the Department of State whether they thought it was bad preparation, not understanding the moment. But all of these things are scripted out prior to. And now this president has not done the quote scripted questions from press. Because this was the Biden administration, the White House would have written the question. They would have given it to the correct reporter, and that reporter would have asked the question, and it would have been, 100% scripted. And this administration, like as you said, has decided to be much more transparent with the American people. And so I don't think these questions were known prior to the kind of the little press gaggle in the Oval Office, but it shouldn't have been a firestorm. This should have been kind of, like you said, there were these other events scheduled afterwards, and a press conference, I guess a signing ceremony, and all these other things that would have that are scripted. And so somebody went off script. And so it appears that Zelensky either meant to go off script, or maybe JD Vance meant to go off script. We'll read some of the reactions from people we've seen either on Facebook or Twitter, to kind of let you know what other people are thinking as well. And it's from different people have different views of who's wrong in this particular case. But for me, it is, imperative that Donald Trump protect our Oval Office. It has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It has to do with that's where our American leader brings foreign leaders to have these moments, right? Like it's not a moment for Zelensky. And that's, I think, was totally misunderstood by Zelensky and his team. And for Zelensky then to ask a question to push back on JD Vance, like JD Vance was somehow unqualified to be speaking on the matter because he had not been to Ukraine, was offensive, quite frankly. And I know that people aren't talking about that right now, but I think in days to come, people will.
So when JD said about Zelensky being out in October, was he for the Biden administration?
Oh yeah, he was campaigning in Pennsylvania for Joe Biden.
Okay.
And so there's already the rub, right? Like, why is Zelensky getting involved with domestic politics to begin with, when that's one of those things that if you're going to take an action, you better be the correct one, and you better know the outcome. And of course, he didn't know the outcome, and whether the Harris campaign or Biden administration extracted that from Zelensky, we may or may not ever know, but it certainly was kind of a point like, hey, you got involved with our domestic politics and you were wrong.
Yeah.
It's one thing to get involved and be right, but it's a whole nother to get involved and be wrong.
Okay. So what happens if the deal falls apart? So for Ukraine, they're going to lose potential investment, economic growth, and the possibility of weakened U.S. support. For the U.S., it stays dependent on China for minerals, making it vulnerable in industries like defense and technology. For Russia, this could be a big win for Putin because U.S. Ukraine relations would be strained. And for China, they keep dominance over the global mineral supply chain and may step in to cut their own deal with Ukraine. So if the deal isn't signed, how does this hurt Ukraine in the long run?
If the deal is not signed, like I said, the devil's in the details. I don't think we want more Russian aggression. We don't want an escalation of the war. No one wants that, right? And so we're, at some point, these things now go back channel to try to figure out, number one, what went wrong, why. Was it Zelensky who went rogue? Was it somebody on our team who went rogue? Was it a bad foreign relations preparation on Zelensky's part? Or did Zelensky act this way because he wanted it to blow up, and he pushed JD Vance and Trump into a position where it blew up? Or you could argue that JD Vance and Trump want to extract more from either Zelensky or get Putin to the table, And so it was they escalated it for their own, not for America's political purposes. So it when you're having breaking news like this, you could speculate a lot of things because the exact knowledge isn't known, right? Like the beforehand, what happened prior to this that brought this to a head, but was there really a sticking point that Zelensky was never going to sign this deal? And so the only way to get out of it was to have this moment, or did Trump and JD Vance not want this deal, and they jumped on Zelensky and decided to act this way? So I don't know that we'll know that answer today.
And there's no chance of it being a conspiracy where they are playing this out to, put Russia on the, making them think that this was a big blowout.
So do you think, so your question is do you think there's a conspiracy between Zelensky and Trump and Vance?
Mm-hmm.
And this was all just a big act to try to get Putin, to the table with the United States? Listen,
this is the first time anything like this in history has ever happened.
I'm sure crazier things have happened. Who knows, right? Like that would be a pretty elaborate scheme. When you look at these folks, they're professional politicians, but they're not actors.
Yeah.
And so it didn't appear like anybody was acting.
No.
And so it looked like there were true emotions taking place.
So is this something where Russia and China could now be in talks to, attack or take over?
The bigger fear, I think the immediate fear is more North Korea involvement. We know before the election that North Korea sent 10,000 troops to the Ukraine border to help Russia. And so I've said for more than a decade that the biggest fear of the United States is Russia, North Korea, and China allying themselves against the rest of the world, because the rest of the world, quite frankly, doesn't have enough people to be in that war. And so, so that to me is a big fear. And so I think if you're going to go down the road of the angle that this was maybe Trump and JD Vance, beating up on Zelensky a little bit to keep Putin from making a deal with China, I could buy into that argument and get Putin to the table like, hey, listen, we went to bat for you, and now we need to have an argument. I mean, prior to this, President Trump said, listen, I've got to be tough on them both, because he said something like, he
can't align.
It's not a direct quote, but he said something like, Russians don't like Zelensky, and Zelensky doesn't like Putin. So I have to be tough on them both. Right. And he said that right in front of Zelensky. And maybe that was Zelensky's flashpoint. Like, I'm the one in the Oval Office. You're the one, you should be, more on my side because I came hat in hand, or I came here to try to work out peace. Right. And so, that could have been the moment where Zelensky got his dander up, so to speak. And so I think we'll find out more from people who were in the room and people who were in the room and with these folks prior to this Oval Office event.
Okay. So for right now, this just means that we have to stay reliant on China and just hope that something happens, whether Zelensky comes back and wants to finally sign, or, we're not all going to go after Ukraine, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think, I don't know that it changes things from necessarily a 30,000 foot level. I think this was an opportunity to move the ball down the field, so to speak. And so the ball didn't get moved down the field. And so I don't know that it moved the ball backwards. It may have, but I don't believe that it did. It kind of, use an analogy or cliche, we went back to square one, wherever we are, right? Like, so I don't know that it's, I don't know that it's a flashpoint. Donald Trump says, you're risking World War III. And I think we've all known that there's hopefully a remote possibility that it leads to that. Did that increase today? I think probably, but I don't know that it increased long term. Like, this is something that this fire can be put out through back channels this weekend. And, on Monday, we're no worse for wear, so to speak.
Yeah. So what's next? If negotiations don't resume, Ukraine will have to look for other partners. Um, China, private investors, whatever it may be. Trump could change the terms to make it more appealing, or he might walk away completely. If relations between Ukraine and the U.S. sour, military aid could be reduced, and Russia will likely exploit the situation to its advantage. So, is there a way for Ukraine and the U.S. to renegotiate a fair deal?
Yes. I think there's always until I think Donald Trump's always willing to make a deal until there's no way to make a deal. This was a step in the deal making process. We have to still remember this president's, 30 to 40 days into his administration. And so this is not I don't think this is, kind of an exclamation point on anything other than, we got to see some raw emotions from world leaders that we normally don't see.
So does the deal remain the same, or do the terms change based on what happened today?
I don't know that, if Zelensky came back and said, hey, I want to sign this exact same deal.
Well, he was begging to stay. They said that he was begging to stay, and Trump
I wouldn't
said
use
no
the
way.
word beg. That's kind of,
That's what the media said.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, the media said that.
I think he probably realized that he was caught in a moment that it was more important than he thought, right? And so I think he started with this thing. He certainly kind of jabbed at JD Vance, like, how could you know, kind of questioning JD Vance's qualifications, and I think that was that led to this. And then when Zelensky said, hey, you're going to feel it in the future, Trump was like, no, you don't have the right to tell us what we're going to feel. And there's no question. Now, maybe Zelensky didn't mean that as a threat. Maybe he didn't even mean to veil a threat. And if that's in fact the case, that's an apology away from being fixed, right? And I think that very well could be the case. And hey, I misunderstood. I didn't mean to, but there's no question the president of the United States took that as a threat and reacted. I think if the president of the United States is in the room and felt it as a threat and he acted as it was a threat, then he did the right thing, but I think it's quite possible Zelensky did not intend for that to be a threat, even though when we all listen to it, it's kind of like, that's either a threat or a veiled threat. And you're in the Oval Office, and that if you're going to do that, you don't go from president to president. You go from, the Minister of War to the Secretary of State to make that quote threat, that veiled threat. You don't do that in front of cameras in the Oval Office, in front of the whole world, to the president of the United States' face. That's just 100% wrong. And so in that regard, Zelensky was 100% wrong and Trump was 100% right.
See, I'll be honest with you. I took it that he was basically saying that, we're going to feel something from Russia someday. That's how I took it, or China. That's how I took it. I didn't take it, but I didn't take it as a threat from him. I just took it as, hey, they're going to come after you next.
And I'm suggesting that it very well could have been a miscommunication on the behalf of the Ukrainian president, right? And so, like I said, he maybe didn't mean it as a threat, but I can certainly see how the president of the United States in the Oval Office, after, he kind of poked at the vice president of the United States as being unqualified, which he clearly is not, and, reacted as it was a threat, so, if the president of Ukraine is watching our podcast and you didn't mean it as a threat, pick up the phone and apologize. That's what it happens when you have a miscommunication.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite possibly the case.
It probably is. So my next question is optics. So, this administration is very big on transparency. While it's good to see what happened today and, see leaders talking about certain things, what are the optics? So seeing 3 grown men lose their what's the word I'm thinking of?
Bravado?
No, not bravado, but their professionalism or whatever you want to say, to kind of get into a little pissing battle And, what are the optics of the American people, or even Ukraine,
Yeah,
for that
I
matter,
think
or
you're,
or the world?
I think it depends on whether you like Trump or not, right? Like if you like Trump, he was 100% correct. If you don't like Trump, then how would you treat a world leader that way in the Oval Office, right? That's kind of the thought was like, oh, how did you move us one step closer to a World War III by not just letting the moment happen, let that world leader have their moment, and let's take this thing to the next step, right? And so which they certainly could have done, but at some point, I think it went downhill for the reasons that I've discussed. And for Zelensky to say, hey, can I ask a question? Why haven't you? After JD Vance just said, you're full of photo ops. Like I don't need a photo op. And then Zelensky kind of held his feet to the fire.
Why would it be considered an oval? Why would it be considered a photo op if the vice president of the United States is going over to see what Russia has done?
Yeah, what JD Vance is saying is like all these world leaders and certainly members of Congress and have gone over to Ukraine for for a photo op. Like that's okay. We're going to go support them. We're going to go stand, wherever we're told to stand and have this picture taken. And so JD Vance is saying I'm not less qualified to speak on this matter because I haven't participated in the photo op, right? And so I don't know that JD Vance was wrong about that. And JD Vance is also somebody who's like, I'm going to protect my personal and professional integrity and the integrity of the office of vice president. And that's something I think that was maybe missing in either Zelensky's preparation or maybe he meant to, but I don't think he understood the moment of the president and vice president in the Oval Office and, how that should be seen by all world leaders. And I do think that it's partly Obama and Biden's fault for empowering other world leaders to act out this way or no gain by America. I mean, I go back to Zelensky's comment of like, oh, this is going to, if in fact it's going to indebt generations of Ukrainians, generations of Americans have been and will continue to be in debt for us protecting the world. So, at least understand that we have gone extremely in debt protecting the rest of the world, including you. And so, now this president's like, at some point that has to stop. Like we have to figure out a way to balance our budget and start paying down the debt. And, some people are disappointed that he hasn't done that in 4 weeks, but he's certainly making strides.
Yeah. Okay. So you said you had some things.
Yeah, I was just going to read a couple just to kind of, I have one person here on Substack who, was, Trump's statement on Zelensky's temper tantrum. Apparently, Zelensky feels entitled. This is kind of the way I feel. Feels entitled to dictate to the United States what we do in Ukraine. Gee, I wonder why he feels that way. I'll answer my own question. He feels that way because Democrats engineered his election, pushed Ukraine into war, and told him they would support him no matter what happened. And now they are gone, and Trump is saying no more. And Zelensky feels desperate and betrayed. What a mess the dumbasses at the State Department created with this strategy. So that's one way to look at it. So then I have another friend, longtime friend. We got in an argument on Facebook. He wrote, and this is longtime Republican, what a disgusting and offensive display by an American president and vice president in the Oval Office. May history forgive us for the duplicitous behavior we displayed in this era and the small, ignorant men who mistake made-for-TV theatrics for leadership. I'm ashamed. Americans with a conscience and an understanding of our place in the world should be ashamed. We're sleepwalking into some pretty serious shit. And, if it turns out to be like, oh, this was the catalyst of World War III, maybe he's correct. I kind of pushed back on him, a lot like we have here on the, I've kind of already said my points to him. But so here's one I think you'll like. Enter today. I won't read the whole thing because it's kind of long. Clearly Trump has sized up Putin and feels that the only way to bring him to the table is to flatter him, butter him up, and get closer to him. He feels that he needs to convince Putin that he is sincere, which he is, about a deal that includes the permanent ceding of some Ukrainian territory and peoples to Russia, and Ukraine not being made part of NATO. Enter today. This was totally. Come on. I'm trying to. Somehow. This is new. Enter today. This was totally choreographed to help. Totally choreographed to help. God damn it. Putin to the table. I'm not saying Zelensky was part of the production. I doubt that he was. But the whole play of inviting the media into the Oval Office and then having the vice president basically attack Zelensky to draw him out and say something that would allow Trump to kick him out of the White House, I think that was all planned. And that's from somebody I really respect, a long-term Republican, and saying that, oh, I think it was, like you said, like you suggested, that it was orchestrated, right? Like so which side orchestrated? If it was orchestrated, do you think it was Zelensky who came in and wanted the deal to fail, so he had to push it JD, and JD Vance and the president responded? Or do you think this was JD Vance and President Trump's plan all along, if in fact this was an orchestrated event?
I think that Zelensky came in with legitimate fears. Like, I think that he has been burned in the past by U.S. administrations, and I think that he is trying to go into this with some kind of guarantee that his country is going to be safe. And so I think he came into it legitimately wanting to make sure that there were guarantees put in place if they were going to make this deal. I truly don't think that it was choreographed. I mean, I just think it went down like that. I think that, I think you have JD, who's a, backwoods Ohio boy, that Trump too, that both just say what they're thinking, good or bad. I mean, I'm not offended by what I saw today. It doesn't change my thinking on anything about the president, the vice president, even Zelensky. I mean, it doesn't change my way. I mean, they're human beings, right? They're human beings.
Great point.
In business dealings. And that's exactly what all of the people, I think people forget to realize that the USA is a business. Yes, it's our homes, it's where we live, it's all of that, but it is still, the president runs a business. And that's exactly what they were doing today. It was a business dealing, and those types of things happen all the time. And I don't know anybody who has ever worked in a company that is not in a leadership role that hears people screaming behind doors and would give anything to be a fly on the wall. We got to be the fly on the wall today.
That's true.
And that, good, bad, or ugly, that is exactly what they deal with. And we had the opportunity to see it.
Yeah. So you're excited about having saw the opportunity. Are you like,
I mean,
think it's good or bad that we saw it?
I think it's honestly, I think it's all in the person of who you are. So I think if you expect your leader to be someone who is polished all the time and always on point and never messes up and, doesn't have human feelings, then yes, you walked away today from being offended. But if you are the type of person that says, you know what, this is a human being who it has this huge role of running this country, who has been put through the ringer time and time again, who has everybody and their mother, trying to take him down, and you're trying to help everybody. We've shown proof of how many people we've helped just by, the USAID and everything that Elon's group is doing, which he is not in control, by the way. And we'll get to that to another episode. That was going to be today. But you have these people that just have these grandiose impressions of what a leader should be. And I call bullshit on it all, because it is a business. It is a business. And if someone comes into your business and is trying to screw you out of a deal or whatever it may be, or walks into your business and disrespects you, you're going to react, because what else are you going to do? It's a human reaction. You're going to say, get out. If someone walks into your house and disrespects you, you're going to say, get out. And if you want to talk about it again, then you come back and you apologize, and then we'll talk about it again, period. And I don't think everybody needs to think the same way I do, but I think if going into it, I think that's the way that you need to look at it. It's a business. He was disrespected in his own business, and he said, "Get out. We're not talking about it anymore."
Taking a timeout.
Timeout.
So I think you hit the nail on the head that today isn't a regression potentially. It potentially could be, but I think you're right. It could just be a, hey, let's just hit the pause button. Let everybody figure out exactly what happened and why it happened, and if it really had something to do with the deal, or if it just had to do with a discussion that went downhill, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you and I are both speculating that, after I saw it, I thought it was I speculated that it was a discussion that went downhill, and I don't think it was choreographed by either side. I agree with you that I think Zelensky had some real fears, and he was sharing those. And the truth of the matter is that probably wasn't the right place to do that. That was yesterday,
okay.
Or that was some other time to share.
Normally they come into these meetings and they have the press in there for a little bit of time, and then the press leaves, right? That didn't happen today.
Well, you said there were other coordinated events. I don't know how much time there was between.
They had the thing after this. Then they were going to have a lunch, and then they were having the signing at 1:00. But yes. Trump was the one who decided to keep the press in. Whether he thought that this was going to show everybody that kumbaya, we're helping you. Here we are helping another country. We're not taking away all funding, and
well, Trump's somebody who's brought the press into everything, right? Like,
yes.
In this presidency, he at least has, and maybe that's kind of the lesson that's learned. Like, okay, sometimes there's a time for it and a time not for it, because whether if you want the deal to get done, now there's these not only were there these huge egos and stakes, involved, right? Huge egos, huge stakes at risk here. Now the egos are both bruised, right? I don't care which side you're on or whatever. Both sides are like, okay, what do I do? I'm going to go lick my wounds and I'm going to come back. And both sides are going to want for their ego to get through it. And I think Zelensky is like this too, right? Like, so this just isn't a Trump problem, I don't think. That
the fact that he shows up to the Oval Office in, basically like a sweatsuit. I mean, what shits does he give? Honestly.
Yeah, it's apparent that he didn't have respect for the office, and and I think that is partly due to previous administrations, quite frankly, and that world leaders don't feel like they have to respect the office. And certainly Zelensky came in with a level of disrespect, and I think he, they were calling on a reporter when Zelensky butted in and said, well, let me ask the vice president a question, right? Mm-hmm. And JD's like, sure, I'll take your question. And then that's honestly when the whole thing started. And then you get into you're going to feel it. And then Trump was offended. And then that
reporter asked a stupid question, and that just set Trump off. So.
Yeah, I don't know I forget what the question was.
She asked, what happens if Putin goes against the ceasefire? And he's like, anything can happen. A bomb could fall on your head right now. And that just fired him up. So basically a stupid question.
So anyway, there's plenty of opinions to go around. I think that this is, from a strategy standpoint, I think it's good to hear you say it doesn't change your opinion of either Trump, JD Vance, or Zelensky, because that's kind of, what Democrats are going to try to say, right? Like, oh, this was a huge stumble by Trump. This was, a complete fumble, and, for the whole world to see. And I don't think it was that. Like, I think it's, if we're going to be intellectually honest, at the worst case, it was a meeting that went downhill, like you suggest, a business meeting that went downhill. Worst case could have been Zelensky was trying to torpedo the deal, or we were trying to torpedo the deal, and the deal got torpedoed for today.
Yeah.
If neither side was trying to torpedo the deal, then, my speculation is that they'll make some adjustments to make everybody's egos feel better, and that aren't really imperative to the major parts of the deal. Everybody will come back to the table. It's taken a long time to get to the table.
Yeah.
And they'll I think come back to the table and get a deal made, in the coming weeks.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all I have for today. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, we still have Ed Rollins on track for next week's podcast.